Hey y'all, welcome back to our 5th episode. I cannot believe that we are already on week 5. I mean, the time is just flying. I feel like I blink and it's time to film another episode. I am so glad that you're here. It's been all over the place for this episode because I thought I knew what I was going to talk about. And then last night I was just like, I don't think that's what I'm supposed to talk about. So we're just going to sort of go on this podcast a little bit unscripted. We're just going to go for it and see where God leads. And I don't know, I'm just excited to sit with you all and talk to you all. Next week, we're going to have a special guest. My friend Mackenzie is going to be on the podcast, and I'm so excited and so happy that she's going to be able to be here. So definitely tune into the next one. It's going to be a little bit different than just a single podcast that I normally have. I cannot wait for you to hear all the wisdom and advice that she gives. So all of that being said, let's jump into today. I first want to read a Bible verse that kind of stuck out to me today. I have recently gone through a situation where I was a little bit disappointed, and I think I just have seen a lot recently where I have just been walking through disappointments and how often those disappointments kind of like shut me down or dictate my life and my feelings and how I address situations. Today, I was just sort of looking at some Bible verses. I sort of just Googled it real quick of like verses about disappointment. But I found this one that stood out to me so much, and I'm going to read it to you. It's Romans 5, 3-5. And it says, "Not only that, but we rejoice in our sufferings, knowing suffering produces endurance, and endurance produces character, and character produces hope. And hope does not put us to shame, because God's love has been poured into our hearts through the Holy Spirit who has been given to us." And I was just like, okay, in my disappointments, how many times do I still rejoice? How many times do I sit there and I'm like, God, you are so good. Even though this is so hard and I'm so upset, you are still so good. I mean, I find it very hard to rejoice in my sufferings. Like, that's not normal. That definitely goes against the status quo. Recently, in this past disappointment, I was like, God, yeah, this sucked, and I'm a little bit bummed out, and I was not a big fan of this situation, but God, you are still so good, and you still have a plan that is far greater than me, and I'm going to choose to stand in this situation that I'm in right now, and I'm still going to praise you, and I'm still going to seek you, and I'm still going to hold on to my peace. I'm not going to go down this rabbit hole of misery and just feeling so emotional and out of it. I'm just going to continue walking and going forward. And I have to say, today I felt so free and excited, and I didn't let yesterday's disappointment affect today's enjoyment and today's possibilities and the things that I can accomplish. Something about this verse was just so impactful to me because it says, suffering produces endurance. Okay, let me tell you, I feel like I can face today's challenges so much better because I was able to stand up in a moment of adversity of like, okay, this is a big bummer, and I'm not a big fan. I don't like this. But today I feel a little bit stronger than I did before. And I know that might seem ridiculous, but I was able to stand in a valley and be like, I'm not letting this take me down. I'm not going to let this rob me of my joy. And today I feel so much more joyful, so much more at peace of, you know what? I have control. I have self-control. I'm the one that dictates how I feel. And I'm going to put all of my emotions at the feet of Jesus, and I'm going to say, though my plans may not have gone how I thought they would, God, you are still great. And I still am going to choose to worship you and serve you and walk in your plan and your purposes for me. And just because that disappointment arose doesn't mean that it's not from you or that it's not a good thing or that it's not what you have planned. It just didn't necessarily meet my expectations. And whenever I sort of started to think about the situation that had happened and was sort of weeding through it and all my emotions at the very beginning of it, I started to ask myself, what exactly are you disappointed in? And I started to realize that it was my expectation. I had a very high expectation for someone else, and that person didn't meet my expectation. And that's not their fault. It wasn't a communicated expectation. It wasn't a known boundary or anything like that. It was just something that I expected from someone else that they didn't deliver. And I felt like God was just working on my heart of, you have to show compassion to the person that disappointed you because they probably didn't know. And the reality of it is the world does not revolve around me. And although that might be hard sometimes to realize, that other people have their lives too and own emotions and thought processes and all of the things. And so I started to kind of work through that as I looked at different areas of my life that I felt disappointment and I felt like someone else has dropped the ball or things like that. I started to realize that most of the time it was because I had an unrealistic expectation that was not communicated, and I kind of set myself up to be disappointed. I found myself hurting myself time and time again. And this was the first situation almost where in the middle of my disappointment, I decided to just rejoice and not live in it. I was like, I'm not living in this disappointment because it's not going to bring me anything. It's not moving me forward. And that has honestly been just the anthem of my heart, is just moving forward in this season of my life, is to keep taking steps forward, because so often I've seen myself just stop or move backwards, and I'm like, not this time, God. Like, I am holding your hand and we are going to walk up this mountain together. I have just felt so free. Like I said, I was just so amazed. I could realize that I am the person that decides my expectations. And that doesn't mean to be pessimistic and think that everything is going to be horrible. I don't mean that by any means, but give other people compassion. You cannot let other people dictate your emotions. As I've grown stronger in my relationship with the Lord and just grown closer to Him, I've realized that things don't tear me down the way that they used to. I used to always be like, God, really? Like, why in the world do I feel this way? And it's because I wasn't pursuing a relationship with Him. I realized that nobody can tear me down when my focus was on God. And that doesn't mean that you're not going to be disappointed or that you're not going to be upset, but it definitely helps you not live in it. Because all of these emotions arise, just like with comparison. Disappointment is sort of the same thing. We are faced with the opportunity to be disappointed constantly. I mean, honestly, constantly. I feel like you could even turn on Instagram and the news and go talk to someone or literally do anything, and you could find something to be disappointed in. This is like a constant choice to align yourself with God's word and God's will and who He says you are and what He says about you, to where even when those emotions arise, you can stand firm in knowing who you are and who you were created to be, and that God has a plan bigger than yourself. And that was just so cool to realize that, yes, obviously these emotions are here and I feel this way, but it's not going to alter my life. So all of that to go into, I think it is so important for you to look at your expectations and ask yourself, like, is this realistic? Is this something that was communicated? And is this honestly something that was actually feasible? Because honestly, I kind of think, well, yes, my expectation in this moment I felt like was definitely feasible. It wasn't the end of the world, and it wasn't really that big of a deal. I really think you just need to check your expectations. With that, I'm not saying that you should just have no expectation and be so pessimistic and all the things. But I do think you should still have boundaries. I think you should kind of grow into yourself, gain some confidence, and help yourself set some boundaries, because, well, yes, boundaries kind of suck in the moment when you want something and it's like, well, what if I just give a little bit? No, you need your boundaries, and boundaries are good. And boundaries can protect your heart and guard your heart from allowing yourself to have this over expectation that's not going to be met. Because if you have your boundary and someone crosses it or doesn't meet it, obviously you have to stand firm in that. But I think boundaries and expectations can kind of be separated in this moment of allow yourself and everyone else around you to embrace compassion and grace and mercy, because people are not going to live up to your standards. And when people disappoint you, yes, it's so hard, but you're able to just stand firm in yourself with knowing that you have boundaries set, you're protecting your heart, you're not going to let your emotions get the best of you, and you're not going to let a disappointment ruin your life. I actually had to look into what disappointment was for the first time. Like, it's something that I always felt, but I never looked into it. And as I was sort of looking into it, I started to realize that disappointment is the gateway to bitterness. And if you do not protect yourself, you can quickly find yourself being disappointed by everything, to the point that you just become bitter and then their bitterness turns to anger, and none of us want to live like that. That is not a fun or life-giving way to live. I really think that you have to be very conscious and very aware of yourself. That way you can guard yourself from that disappointment. And if you find yourself in situations where you're constantly being disappointed, that's when you need to set your boundary. And maybe it's either you need to set your boundary with yourself of, okay, I'm going to change my expectations. Maybe it's a family member, because family members can disappoint you. The people that are closest to you have the most impact to disappoint you and to hurt you, because you're like, hello. Maybe even with family members, you have to create this boundary of like, okay, I know that this is how the situation is, and I'm going to be praying for this and praying for breakthrough, but for now, I have to have this boundary, and I'm going to lower my expectation so that I can guard my heart and protect myself. Maybe it's with your friends or people that you are talking to or people around you, whatever it is, same thing. Okay, I have to set this boundary. Maybe it's a boyfriend and that boyfriend is constantly disappointing you. I want to say this, like if your expectation for them has been communicated time and time again, and it's reasonable and it lines up with who God says you are supposed to be and how he says a man is supposed to treat you, then yes, that is where you set that boundary of, okay, this is not working. I have to get you out of my life because we've talked about this, we've gone over this, you're not meeting what I need, and I'm sorry, but this is just not working. And I think so often, and I see this all the time, girls will date a guy and then they'll break up and get back together, break up and get back together, or they're constantly arguing, normally about the same things over and over again. If you truly are being healthy about it and being reasonable, if that is a constant disappointment and you're not asking for that much, you have to be like, okay, I'm drawing the line here. Like, this is where this has to stop, because I have to protect myself, because I do not want to live in a constant state of disappointment. And I've been there where I've felt like I've asked for small things, and this is even in friendships, this isn't just in relationships, but I feel like I've asked for small things and it hasn't been respected or understood or taken to heart time and time and time again. And every time I'd be like, okay, maybe next time will be different. And then next time would roll around and it was the same exact thing. And I found myself getting more and more disappointed until I did reach that point of bitterness to where I was like, I'm just unhappy. Everything going on around me, it's just upsetting. And that is not a good place to live. So you have to find yourself at the very beginning. This is me guarding my heart, and I'm going to not put unrealistic expectations or uncommunicated expectations on someone, but also know what your boundaries are. There is like a baseline of respect. I mean, everyone deserves respect. And so if your expectation is below that, girl, raise your expectation. I'm not saying lower your expectation to below what a general person should deem as respectful or normal. But I am saying, if you are in a situation where you expect someone to be a number 10 in a situation that isn't necessarily necessary, then give them some slack and some ability to come into themselves and have their own emotions and own feelings and own thoughts. But setting the boundary line is like, okay, these are my expectations and you are not going to drop below here, because this is just general respect and how you should treat someone and how you should act. So obviously your boundaries are here, and you should expect all of those things within your boundary of how someone should treat you. And then your expectations are everything else, above that are things that I feel like you should sort of be like, okay, is this a realistic expectation? And that has just really helped me guard my heart and protect myself. All of this to say, I just think that it is so important that you don't let disappointment steal your dreams. If someone has hurt you, or maybe they didn't quite live up to your expectation, that doesn't mean they're a horrible person. And that doesn't mean that you just have to write them off. Like, we do have to show grace to that person. Maybe take the step of like, okay, we haven't talked about this, so I'm just going to be like, hey, let me be open and honest and forward with you. This hurt my feelings, or I felt this disappointment. That way you're not jeopardizing a relationship that could be really good, or a friendship that could bring a lot of fruit, or an opportunity that could put you in the next season of your life where God is calling you to be. You don't want to discount something just because you did have a moment of disappointment, especially if you haven't communicated it. I definitely think that communication is key, especially with other people. just be like, hey, this happened and I don't really know why, or this isn't how I expected it, but let's talk about it. I want to hear where you're coming from and kind of gauge the situation and see where they're at. That is a huge one for me, is just guard your boundaries and your expectations and watch out for disappointment, because I know for me, I tend to be super forgiving to a point, and then I'm like, okay, I'll give you chance after chance after chance after chance, and then I hit this wall where I find that me and myself is just so angry and bitter, and I don't like that version of myself, and that is my responsibility to protect myself from getting there. So going back to the Bible verse, it says that suffering produces endurance and endurance produces character. I have seen that just in one time of being like, you know what, I'm going to rejoice in this moment, and it produced so much endurance because I realized like, wow, I can handle something better than I thought I can, and I feel so much better for it. I sort of was able to be like, I can live like this even after a disappointment, and it's building how I view other people and situations and how I think I will respond in things that arise later. So realize that whenever you push through something, I mean, look at running. If you were to go out and run for the first time after never running, it would be really hard. But if you're like, hey, I'm going to push myself a little bit more tomorrow and a little bit more tomorrow, and slowly you build that endurance to the point where you are running this race and you look back and like, there is no way I could have done this when I started. Take it incrementally, moment by moment, day by day, to stand up in the face of disappointment until you find yourself being like, yeah, this really sucked, but I'm okay, and I'm going to be better for it, and I'm going to use this situation to propel me forward. I'm going to use this situation to learn more about myself and the boundaries that I need to put in place. Kind of jump yourself up from there. All of that, I want to encourage you that you are not defined by your disappointments. You are not defined by how other people act or how other people treat you. You are not defined by those moments where you find yourself lost and emotional and miserable. You are not too far gone if you find yourself to the point that you are just so angry and bitter. You have the beautiful ability to turn it around and be like, okay, I'm going to stand in this moment. I'm going to set my boundaries. I'm going to guard my heart, and I'm going to watch my expectations, and I'm going to continue living my life fully running after God and His plan and who He's called me to be. And I'm not going to let the disappointments from 20 years ago, 10 years ago, 5 years ago, yesterday dictate who I am today and tomorrow. I'm going to rise up in that moment of suffering and feeling like it's so horrible, and I'm going to rejoice. I am going to gain more endurance, and I'm going to grow my character, because I want to find myself facing every day with hope and happiness, because that is what God has put in our hearts. So I encourage you to read Romans 5, 3-5. If you have to read it 1,000,000 times until it gets into your heart, I promise you there is so much packed in those few verses. So I definitely encourage that. And I am really so glad that all of you are here. Like I said before, it just brings me so much joy, and cannot wait for next week with Mackenzie. So definitely tune in for next week's episode. If you want any updates or to keep track of everything going on with this podcast, you can run over to Instagram and follow Radiantly Free. We are on YouTube and Spotify right now. I'm trying to find the time to sit down and get it put on other platforms, so bear with me for that. But thank you so much for joining me. I hope you all have a great week and a happy Thursday. I love you all so much.